The Summer House Secret. Nestled in the far corner of her grandmother's garden stood the old summer house, surrounded by ivy and hidden by rows of hedges and blooming wildflowers. For years the structure had been a mystery to Sophie. Each summer when her family visited her grandmother, Sophie would steal glances at the summer house, hoping to catch a glimpse inside. But her grandmother never allowed it, saying the old house was too fragile and worn. This summer, however, Sophie was determined to find out what lay inside. She was 13 now, and her curiosity about the summer house was stronger than ever. The family had arrived at her grandmother's house just a day before, and Sophie had spent most of her time exploring the lush garden. While her parents were busy preparing for a family gathering, Sophie decided this was her chance. With cautious steps, she approached the summer house, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The old wooden door was painted a faded green, and vines curled around its rusty hinges. Sophie placed her hand on the door handle and gave it a gentle twist. To her surprise, it turned easily and the door creaked open. Sunlight poured into the room, illuminating the dust particles floating in the air. The room was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, making the shapes beneath them look ghostly. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine but shook it off. Her eyes scanned the room, stopping on a dusty mirror hanging on the far wall. The frame was ornate, made of dark wood with intricate carvings of flowers and vines. Sophie pulled off the sheet covering the mirror and stared at her reflection. Suddenly, something in the mirror caught her attention, a small shimmer behind her. She turned quickly, her heart racing. The shimmer had come from a large chest in the corner of the room. The chest was beautifully carved, its dark wood polished and gleaming in the sunlight. Intrigued, Sophie knelt down and brushed off the dust covering the lid. She noticed that the chest had a delicate lock, but it was slightly ajar. With a deep breath, she opened the chest. Inside she found a collection of old, faded letters tied with a red ribbon, some delicate lace gloves, a tarnished silver locket, and a small leather-bound journal. Her fingers tingled with excitement as she picked up the journal, feeling its worn leather cover under her fingertips. Carefully, Sophie opened the journal and began reading. The handwriting was elegant but faint, as if written in another time. The journal belonged to a woman named Margaret, her grandmother's sister. Sophie didn't know much about Margaret as her grandmother rarely spoke of her. But as Sophie read the journal, she felt as if she were uncovering a secret part of her family's history. The entries spoke of a summer long ago, filled with whispers of secret meetings, moonlit walks, and hidden love letters. Margaret had written about a young man named James, whom she had met one summer while he was visiting relatives nearby. They would meet by the river under the stars, sharing dreams and stolen moments, away from the watchful eyes of their families. Sophie's heart raced as she read Margaret's words. She could feel the excitement, the nervousness, and the longing in each sentence. It was as if Margaret had poured her soul onto those pages. Sophie felt an overwhelming urge to know what had happened to Margaret and James. She read on, her fingers trembling as she turned each page. As the summer went on, Margaret and James had to keep their relationship hidden. Their families would not approve, as James came from a family that was considered too different in those days. The entries became more urgent, filled with the worry that they might be discovered. But then something unexpected happened. In one of the last entries, Margaret wrote about a final meeting in the summer house, where they promised to run away together. They had planned to meet at midnight, with Margaret bringing only what she could carry, and James promising to take care of the rest. Sophie read the last entry with bated breath. The final lines were short, written in hurried strokes. Asterisk, waited at midnight. He didn't come. I left the locket here as a reminder of what could have been. I shall carry on, but my heart will remain here forever waiting. Asterisk. Sophie placed her hand on the locket in the chest, realizing it was the very one Margaret had written about. Her heart ached for her great-aunt who had waited in vain. She wondered why James had never shown up. Did he have second thoughts? Had something happened to him? Suddenly, Sophie heard her grandmother's voice calling her from outside. She quickly closed the chest, feeling as if she had just experienced a piece of someone else's life, someone who had loved deeply and lost. That evening during dinner, Sophie could barely focus on the conversations around her. Her mind was filled with thoughts of Margaret and James. After dinner, she decided to speak to her grandmother, hoping for some answers. She found her sitting in the living room, knitting by the fire. "Grandma," Sophie began hesitantly, "I found something in the summer house today. There's a chest, with a journal in it. It belonged to Margaret, didn't it?" Her grandmother looked up, her face surprised but calm. "You went into the summer house?" she asked, her voice soft. Sophie nodded. "I know I shouldn't have, but I wanted to know why you keep it locked away." Her grandmother sighed, her gaze distant. "Yes, the journal belonged to Margaret. She was my younger sister, you know. And that chest, those were her memories. She loved someone very deeply, but life didn't turn out the way she'd hoped." "Why didn't James meet her that night?" Sophie asked, unable to keep the question to herself. Her grandmother's eyes grew misty. "I never knew the full story. Margaret told me bits and pieces. I was just a little girl, but I remember she waited all night. In the morning she was devastated. She was never the same after that summer." They sat in silence, the room filled with the quiet crackle of the fire. Sophie felt a sadness settle over her, understanding a little more about her family's history, about the loss and the secrets that time could not erase. The next day, as Sophie was packing to leave, her grandmother handed her a small box. Inside was the locket from the chest. "This belonged to Margaret," her grandmother said softly. "She would have wanted you to have it." As Sophie closed her suitcase, she looked out at the summer house one last time. The old structure seemed to hold its secrets close, but Sophie knew that some mysteries are meant to be uncovered, like lost pieces of a story that add richness and depth to the lives we live. And as she slipped the locket around her neck, Sophie felt a new connection to her past, carrying forward the memory of a love that once bloomed, hidden in the shadows of a forgotten summer. With her family's legacy around her neck, Sophie left her grandmother's house, but she knew she'd never truly leave behind the memory of that hidden romance and the wistful summer when she had unlocked a part of her family's heart.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, and share our channel Magic Mingle with your friends to enjoy more magical stories.